Jonathan's world shattered when his daughter revealed her stepmother's cruelty. Desperate for proof, he hid under the bed, only to uncover a horrifying truth that would destroy everything he held dear. What he discovers next will leave you speechless. Like and subscribe for more gripping stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The Charleston sun beat down mercilessly as Jonathan Prescott's polished shoes clicked against the cobblestone driveway of his sprawling mansion. His fingers fumbled with his tie, a nervous habit he'd developed over the past few weeks. The whispers about Abigail, his wife of 3 years, had been growing louder, impossible to ignore. At first, he'd dismissed them as idle gossip, the kind that always seemed to follow successful families in their tight-knit community. But lately, something felt off. The way Abigail's smile never quite reached her eyes, the hushed phone conversations that abruptly ended when he entered a room, the inexplicable tension that hung in the air like a storm about to break. As he reached for the ornate brass door handle, a chill ran down his spine despite the sweltering heat. He paused, taking a deep breath to steel himself. Whatever was waiting for him inside, he had to face it head-on. The moment he stepped into the foyer, he knew something was wrong. The house was eerily quiet, devoid of the usual sounds of life. No classical music drifting from Abigail's study, no laughter from his daughter Lily's playroom. Just silence, heavy and oppressive. "Abigail!" he called out, his voice echoing through the empty halls. No response. "Lily?" A flicker of panic began to rise in his chest. Where were they? He climbed the grand staircase, his heart pounding with each step. As he reached the landing, a muffled sob caught his attention. It was coming from Lily's room. Jonathan pushed open the door, and his heart shattered at the sight before him. Lily, his precious 9-year-old daughter, was curled up in the corner of her room, her small body shaking with silent tears. Her golden hair, usually so neatly braided, was a tangled mess, and her favorite stuffed animal lay discarded on the floor. "Lily, sweetheart, what's wrong?" He rushed to her side, gathering her into his arms. She flinched at his touch, and the realization hit him like a physical blow. His daughter was afraid. "It's okay, baby. Daddy's here. You can tell me anything," he soothed, gently stroking her hair. Lily looked up at him, her blue eyes swimming with tears and something else. Fear. "I can't," she whispered. "She'll be mad." Jonathan felt a cold dread settling in the pit of his stomach. "Who, Lily? Who will be mad?" Lily's lower lip trembled as she spoke the words that would change everything. "Mommy Abigail, she hurts me, Daddy." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Jonathan struggled to breathe, to think, to process what he'd just heard. It couldn't be true. Abigail, the woman he loved, the woman he'd trusted with his most precious gift, his daughter. How could she? "What do you mean she hurts you?" he asked, fighting to keep his voice calm, even as rage and disbelief warred within him. Lily's words came out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back for far too long. "She gets angry when you're not here. She yells and says mean things. Sometimes she hits me." The little girl's voice dropped to a whisper. "She says if I tell you, she'll send me away, and I'll never see you again." Jonathan felt physically ill. How long had this been going on? How had he not seen it? He'd been so wrapped up in his work, in providing for his family, that he'd missed the signs of abuse happening right under his own roof. "Lily, listen to me," he said, cupping her tear-stained face in his hands. "You did the right thing by telling me. I promise you, I will never let anyone hurt you again. You're safe now." But even as he spoke the words, Jonathan knew it wouldn't be that simple. Abigail was a respected member of the community, known for her charity work and social graces. Who would believe that behind closed doors she was capable of such cruelty? He needed proof. Without it, it would be his daughter's word against Abigail's, and in their world of wealth and influence, that might not be enough. As he held Lily close, soothing her fears and promising protection, Jonathan's mind raced. He had to find a way to expose the truth, to catch Abigail in the act. But how? The sound of a car pulling up the driveway made them both freeze. Abigail was home. "Lily, I need you to be brave for me," Jonathan whispered urgently. "Go wash your face and act like everything is normal. Can you do that for Daddy?" Lily nodded, her eyes wide with fear but trusting in her father's words. As she disappeared into the bathroom, Jonathan straightened up, smoothing his suit and plastering on a smile he didn't feel. He had to play this carefully. If Abigail suspected he knew anything, she might become even more dangerous. The front door opened, and Abigail's voice rang out. "Jonathan! Lily! I'm home!" Jonathan took a deep breath, steeling himself for the performance of his life. He had to pretend everything was fine while he figured out how to protect his daughter and uncover the ugly truth lurking beneath the surface of his perfect life. As he descended the stairs to greet his wife, Jonathan felt like a man walking to his own execution. The woman he'd loved, the life he'd built, it was all crumbling around him. And the worst was yet to come. The next few days were a special kind of hell for Jonathan. Every smile he forced, every casual conversation with Abigail felt like a betrayal to Lily. He watched his wife like a hawk, searching for any sign of the monster his daughter had described, but Abigail was the picture of maternal perfection. She helped Lily with her homework, prepared her favorite meals, and tucked her in at night with a lullaby and a kiss. To anyone looking in from the outside, they were the ideal family. But Jonathan knew better now. He saw the flash of something cold in Abigail's eyes when Lily accidentally spilled her juice at dinner. He noticed how Lily's shoulders tensed when Abigail raised her voice, even in casual conversation. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. Jonathan had come home early from work, hoping to spend some time with Lily. As he approached the house, he heard shouting coming from inside. His heart racing, he quietly entered through the side door. Abigail's voice, shrill with anger, echoed through the halls. "You stupid, clumsy girl! Look what you've done!" Jonathan crept towards the sound, his whole body tense. He peered around the corner into the living room and felt his blood run cold. Lily was on her knees, desperately trying to clean up a broken vase. Tears streamed down her face as Abigail towered over her, face contorted with rage. "I'm sorry, Mommy Abigail," Lily sobbed. "It was an accident." "An accident?" Abigail sneered. "Just like it was an accident when you told your father those lies about me." Jonathan's heart stopped. She knew. Somehow Abigail had found out that Lily had confided in him. "I didn't," Lily began, but her words were cut off by a sharp slap that sent her sprawling. It took every ounce of Jonathan's willpower not to rush in and confront Abigail right then and there, but he knew that without concrete proof, it would be his word against hers. He needed more. That night, after a tense dinner where the air was thick with unspoken accusations, Jonathan made his decision. He would get the proof he needed, no matter what it took. The next day, while Abigail was out at her weekly charity luncheon, Jonathan installed hidden cameras throughout the house. The guilt of invading his family's privacy gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside. This was about protecting Lily. For the next week, Jonathan lived in a state of constant anxiety. Every moment he wasn't home, he worried about what might be happening to Lily. But the cameras showed nothing out of the ordinary. Abigail remained the perfect stepmother, at least when she knew she might be watched. It was Lily who finally provided the key. "She's always worst at night," she whispered to Jonathan one evening as he tucked her in. "When she thinks you're asleep." The revelation hit Jonathan like a punch to the gut. Of course, Abigail was too smart to risk being caught during the day. She waited until the house was quiet, until she thought everyone was asleep. That night, Jonathan pretended to go to bed early, complaining of a headache. He kissed Abigail goodnight, his skin crawling at the touch of her lips, and retreated to their bedroom. But sleep was the furthest thing from his mind. As soon as he heard Abigail's footsteps heading towards Lily's room, he slipped out of bed and followed silently. The sight that greeted him outside Lily's door would haunt him forever. Abigail stood over Lily's bed, a look of pure hatred on her face that Jonathan had never seen before. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" Abigail hissed, her voice low and menacing, "trying to turn your father against me. But let me tell you something, you little brat. He'll never believe you over me, and if you try to tell him anything again, I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your miserable life." Lily whimpered, curling into a tight ball under her covers. "I'm sorry, I won't say anything, I promise." "You'd better not," Abigail snarled, reaching out to grab Lily's arm roughly, "because if you do, I'll make sure you disappear, just like your real mother." Jonathan's blood ran cold. What was Abigail talking about? Lily's mother, his first wife, had died in a car accident when Lily was just a baby. At least that's what he'd always believed. He wanted nothing more than to burst into the room, to protect his daughter and confront the woman who had betrayed them both so completely. But he forced himself to stay still, to keep watching. He needed to hear more. Abigail continued, her voice dripping with venom. "Your daddy thinks she died in an accident, but I know the truth. I made sure she was out of the picture. And I can do the same to you if you don't learn to keep your mouth shut." Jonathan felt like he was going to be sick. The implications of what Abigail was saying, it was too horrific to contemplate. Had she somehow been responsible for his first wife's death? Had everything in their life together been built on a lie? He was so lost in his shock and horror that he almost missed Abigail's next words. "I've worked too hard to get where I am," she hissed. "I'm not about to let some sniveling little brat ruin everything. Your daddy's money is mine, and there's nothing you can do about it." In that moment, Jonathan understood the full extent of Abigail's betrayal. She had never loved him or Lily. It had all been about the money, about the status and power that came with being Mrs. Jonathan Prescott. As Abigail finally left Lily's room, Jonathan pressed himself against the wall, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure she would hear it. But she passed by without noticing him, disappearing down the hallway. Jonathan waited until he was sure she was gone before slipping into Lily's room. His daughter lay curled up in her bed, her small body shaking with silent sobs. "Lily," he whispered, gathering her into his arms. "It's okay, baby. Daddy's here." Lily clung to him, burying her face in his chest. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she cried. "I tried to be good, I really did." "You have nothing to be sorry for," Jonathan said fiercely. "None of this is your fault, and I promise you, it ends now." As he held his trembling daughter, Jonathan's mind raced. He had the proof he needed now, but it wasn't enough. Abigail's words about Lily's mother haunted him. He needed to know the truth, the whole truth, before he could decide what to do next. One thing was certain: he couldn't confront Abigail directly. If she was capable of what she had implied, who knew what she might do if cornered? No, he needed to be smart about this. He needed to dig deeper, to uncover every dark secret Abigail had buried. As Lily finally drifted off to sleep in his arms, Jonathan made a silent vow. He would protect his daughter, he would uncover the truth about his first wife's death, and he would make Abigail pay for every moment of pain and fear she had inflicted on their family. But little did Jonathan know, his quest for the truth would lead him down a path darker and more twisted than he could have ever imagined. The secrets lurking in the shadows of his perfect life were about to come to light, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, Jonathan went through the motions of his usual routine, his mind a whirlwind of fear, anger, and determination. He kissed Lily goodbye, promising her silently that things would change soon. Then he turned to Abigail, forcing himself to smile as he pecked her on the cheek, fighting the urge to recoil from her touch. "I'll be home late tonight," he lied smoothly. "Big meeting with some potential investors." Abigail's smile was picture perfect, not a hint of the monster he'd witnessed last night. "Of course, darling. Don't work too hard." As soon as he was in his car, Jonathan let out a shaky breath. He wasn't going to work today. Instead, he drove to the offices of Mitch Callahan, his oldest friend and the best private investigator in Charleston. Mitch listened in stunned silence as Jonathan poured out the whole sordid story. When he finished, Mitch let out a low whistle. Jesus, John, I always thought Abigail was too good to be true, but this is something else. I need your help, Mitch, Jonathan said, his voice raw with emotion. I need to know everything. About Abigail, about what really happened to Sarah. Everything. Mitch nodded gravely. I'll do everything I can, John, but you need to be prepared. Whatever we find, it's not going to be pretty. For the next few weeks, Jonathan lived a double life. To the outside world, he was still the successful businessman with the perfect family. But every moment he could spare was devoted to uncovering the truth. He threw himself into his own investigation, poring over old newspapers, financial records, anything that might give him a clue. All the while, he had to maintain the facade of normalcy at home, pretending everything was fine, while his skin crawled every time Abigail touched him. The worst part was leaving Lily alone with Abigail. He'd considered sending her to stay with his parents, but he was afraid that might tip Abigail off. Instead, he bought Lily a small, discreet panic button, disguised as a charm bracelet, instructing her to press it if she ever felt truly in danger. It was Mitch who finally uncovered the first real lead. I've been digging into Abigail's past, he told Jonathan one afternoon in a quiet corner of a local cafe. And there's something strange. Before she married you, it's like she barely existed. No social media, no old yearbooks, nothing. Jonathan frowned. What do you mean? I mean, the Abigail Carter you married. I don't think that's her real name. The revelation hit Jonathan like a physical blow. He'd known Abigail was hiding things, but this was beyond anything he'd imagined. There's more, Mitch continued, his voice low. I found a police report from about 5 years ago, just before you met Abigail. A woman matching her description was wanted for questioning in connection with the death of a wealthy older man, Edward Prescott. Any relation? Jonathan felt the blood drain from his face. My uncle, he whispered. He died of a heart attack just before I met Abigail. I introduced her to the family at his funeral. Mitch's expression was grim. John, I think your wife is a con artist, and a dangerous one at that. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and the picture they formed was terrifying. Had Abigail targeted him specifically? Had everything, their meeting, their whirlwind romance, their marriage, been part of some grand scheme? But there was still one piece missing. Sarah. What did Abigail have to do with the death of his first wife? As if reading his mind, Mitch spoke up. I've been looking into Sarah's accident too, and John, I don't think it was an accident at all. Jonathan felt like he couldn't breathe. What did you find? The police report noted some inconsistencies at the scene. Skid marks that didn't match the supposed sequence of events. And there was a witness, a homeless man, who claimed he saw another car force Sarah off the road. But he was dismissed as unreliable due to his history of mental illness. Jonathan's mind reeled. All this time, he'd believed Sarah's death was a tragic accident, to think that she might have been murdered. I need to know for sure, he said, his voice shaking. Can you find this witness? Mitch nodded. I'll do my best. But John, you need to be careful. If Abigail realizes what we're doing... I know, Jonathan said grimly, but I can't stop now. I need to know the truth, for Lily's sake, for Sarah's sake. As he drove home that evening, Jonathan's mind was a tumult of emotions, grief for the wife he'd lost, fear for his daughter's safety, and a burning anger towards the woman who had infiltrated his life and torn it apart. He pulled into the driveway, steeling himself for another evening of pretending, but as he approached the front door, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Lily was screaming. Without thinking, Jonathan burst through the door. The scene that greeted him would be seared into his memory forever. Lily was on the floor of the living room, curled into a ball, her arms raised to protect her head. Abigail stood over her, a heavy crystal vase raised high, ready to strike. Abigail, no! Jonathan roared. Abigail whirled around, her face a mask of fury that quickly morphed into shock as she realized Jonathan was home early. The vase slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Lily scrambled to her feet and ran to Jonathan, wrapping her arms around his legs and sobbing uncontrollably. Abigail's shock gave way to a cold, calculating look. "Jonathan," she said, her voice steady. "This isn't what it looks like." But Jonathan wasn't listening. He scooped Lily into his arms, holding her close as she cried into his shoulder. "It's okay, baby," he murmured. "Daddy's here. You're safe now." He turned to Abigail, and when he spoke, his voice was ice. "Get out." Abigail's eyes narrowed. "You can't be serious." "Jonathan, let me explain." "I said get out!" Jonathan shouted, causing Lily to flinch in his arms. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "Leave now, Abigail, before I call the police." For a moment it looked like Abigail might argue further, but then something in Jonathan's expression must have convinced her. Without another word, she turned and walked out the door. As soon as she was gone, Jonathan sank to his knees, still holding Lily close. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," he whispered, his own tears mixing with hers. "I'm so sorry, but it's over now. She's gone, and she's never going to hurt you again." Lily's sobs gradually subsided, and she looked up at her father with red-rimmed eyes. "Is she really gone, Daddy? Forever?" Jonathan nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her tear-stained face. "Forever, baby, I promise." But even as he said the words, a chill ran down his spine. He knew Abigail wouldn't give up so easily. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. As night fell, Jonathan sat by Lily's bedside, watching her sleep. He'd called Mitch, asking him to post a security detail around the house. He wasn't taking any chances. His phone buzzed with a text. It was from Mitch. "Found the witness. Meeting him tomorrow. Be careful, John." Jonathan looked down at Lily's peaceful face, so innocent in sleep. He leaned down and kissed her forehead gently. "I'll make this right, baby," he whispered. "Whatever it takes, I'll make this right." As he walked out of Lily's room, Jonathan didn't notice the small, blinking light coming from the antique dollhouse in the corner. He didn't see the tiny camera hidden inside, still faithfully recording everything in the room. And he certainly didn't see the shadowy figure watching the live feed from a laptop in a car parked down the street, a cold smile playing on Abigail's lips as she watched the scene unfold. "Oh, Jonathan," she murmured to herself, "you have no idea what you're up against." The next morning dawned grey and gloomy, matching Jonathan's mood perfectly. He'd barely slept, spending most of the night checking on Lily and jumping at every small noise. Now, as he sipped his coffee and watched Lily pick at her breakfast, he felt a gnawing worry in the pit of his stomach. "You don't have to go to school today if you don't want to, sweetheart," he said gently. Lily looked up, her eyes still puffy from crying. "Can I stay home with you, Daddy?" Jonathan's heart clenched. More than anything, he wanted to say yes, to keep her close and safe. But he had to meet Mitch and the witness. It might be his only chance to uncover the truth about Sarah's death. "I'm sorry, baby, but Daddy has some very important work to do today," he said, hating himself for the disappointment that flashed across her face. "But how about this? You can stay with Aunt Emily today. Would you like that?" Lily nodded, a small smile finally gracing her features. Emily was Jonathan's sister, and Lily adored her. Jonathan breathed a sigh of relief. At least with Emily, he knew Lily would be safe. After dropping Lily off at Emily's house with strict instructions not to let anyone but him pick her up, Jonathan headed to the rendezvous point Mitch had arranged. It was a small, dingy diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where people went to avoid being noticed. Mitch was already there when Jonathan arrived, sitting in a booth at the back with a man Jonathan didn't recognize. As he approached, Jonathan could see that the stranger was older, probably in his 60s, with a weathered face and haunted eyes. "John," Mitch said, standing to greet him, "this is Tom Grady. He's the witness I told you about." Jonathan slid into the booth across from Tom, his heart racing. This man might hold the key to everything. "Mr. Grady," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I understand you..." You saw something the night my wife died." Tom's eyes darted around nervously before settling back on Jonathan. "Yeah, I saw something all right. Something I ain't never been able to forget, no matter how much I've tried." Over the next hour, Tom recounted the events of that fateful night. He'd been sleeping rough under a bridge when he was awakened by the sound of screeching tires. He'd seen two cars, Sarah's and another, a black SUV. He described how the SUV had deliberately run Sarah off the road, then stopped briefly before speeding away. "I tried to tell the cops," Tom said, his voice shaking, "but they didn't believe me. Said I was just some crazy bum looking for attention." Jonathan felt like he was going to be sick. Did you see the driver of the SUV?" Tom nodded slowly. It was a woman. Couldn't see her face clear, but she had long, dark hair, and she was wearing this fancy red coat. Looked real out of place in that part of town. Jonathan and Mitch exchanged a look. They both knew who fit that description. "Mr. Grady," Jonathan said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "would you be willing to tell this story to the police? To testify if needed?" Tom hesitated, fear flashing in his eyes. I don't know. Last time I tried, they treated me like garbage. And if what you're saying is true, if this woman really did kill your wife, she sounds dangerous." Jonathan leaned forward, his desperation evident. "Please, Mr. Grady, I know I'm asking a lot, but this might be my only chance to get justice for my wife and protect my daughter. I promise. I'll make sure you're taken care of. Whatever you need, a place to stay, protection, anything." Tom was silent for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll do it, for your wife and your little girl." Relief washed over Jonathan. Finally, they had a breakthrough. With Tom's testimony, they might have enough to go to the police to start building a case against Abigail. As they left the diner, Mitch pulled Jonathan aside. "John, this is good, but we need to be careful. Abigail's dangerous, and now she's cornered. There's no telling what she might do." Jonathan nodded grimly. "I know, but I can't back down now, Mitch, not when we're so close." He was about to say more when his phone rang. It was Emily. Jonathan's blood ran cold as he answered. "John?" Emily's voice was panicked. "John, Lily's gone." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What do you mean, gone?" Jonathan demanded, his voice rising in fear. "I just went to check on her and she wasn't in her room," Emily sobbed. "The window was open. John, I'm so sorry. I don't know how." But Jonathan wasn't listening anymore. He was already running to his car, Mitch close behind. "What is it?" Mitch asked as they peeled out of the parking lot. "Abigail has Lily," Jonathan said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The drive to Emily's house was a blur. When they arrived, the police were already there. Jonathan barely registered Emily's tearful apologies as he pushed past her into the house. Lily's room was just as Emily had described. The window was open, the curtains fluttering in the breeze. On the bed, something caught Jonathan's eye. It was Lily's panic button bracelet, the charm cracked and broken. As Jonathan stared at it, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Did you really think you could take my family away from me, Jonathan? If you want to see your precious Lily again, come alone to the old Prescott summer house. You have 1 hour." Jonathan's blood ran cold. The Prescott summer house had been abandoned for years, ever since his Uncle Edward died. It was isolated, miles from the nearest neighbor. "John, wait," Mitch said, grabbing his arm as Jonathan headed for the door. "You can't go alone. It's obviously a trap." "I don't have a choice," Jonathan snapped. "She has my daughter, Mitch, my little girl." Mitch's expression was grim. "At least let me call for backup. We can—" But Jonathan was already shaking his head. No police. If Abigail sees them coming, who knows what she might do to Lily. I have to do this alone." Before Mitch could argue further, Jonathan was gone, racing towards what he knew might be his doom. But he didn't care. All that mattered was saving Lily. The drive to the summer house was the longest of Jonathan's life. Every second felt like an eternity, his mind conjuring up horrific scenarios of what Abigail might be doing to Lily. As he pulled up to the dilapidated house, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. The place looked like something out of a horror movie, which, Jonathan realized with a chill, it essentially was. He approached the front door cautiously, every sense on high alert. Just as he was about to knock, the door swung open with a creak. "Come in, darling." Abigail Jonathan's heart hammered in his chest as he stepped into the dimly lit foyer of the old summer house. The air was thick with dust and the musty scent of abandonment. Abigail's voice echoed from somewhere deeper in the house, sending chills down his spine. "We're in the living room, Jonathan. Do join us." Us. The word gave him hope. Lily was still alive. He made his way through the decaying house, his footsteps creaking on the old wooden floors. As he entered the living room, the scene before him made his blood run cold. Abigail sat in an ancient armchair, looking for all the world like a queen on her throne. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, as if this were just another society event. But the cold glint in her eyes and the gun in her hand shattered any illusion of normalcy. Lily was huddled on the floor beside her, tear tracks staining her cheeks. When she saw Jonathan, her eyes widened. "Daddy!" she cried, starting to get up. Ah! Abigail tutted, pressing the gun against Lily's temple. "Stay put, darling. Daddy and I need to have a little chat." Jonathan felt like he might be sick. "Let her go, Abigail," he said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "This is between you and me. She's just a child." Abigail laughed, a high, brittle sound that echoed in the empty room. "Oh, Jonathan, sweet, naive Jonathan. Don't you see? She's the whole point." "What are you talking about?" Jonathan asked, his mind racing. He needed to keep her talking, to find some way to get Lily out of harm's way. "This child," Abigail said, running her free hand through Lily's hair in a perverse gesture of affection, "is my ticket to everything. The Prescott fortune, the social standing, all of it. Did you really think I married you for love?" The words hit Jonathan like a physical blow, even though he'd already suspected as much. "Then why?" he asked. "Why go through all of this?" Abigail's eyes hardened. "Because I deserve it," she hissed. "Do you have any idea what it's like to grow up with nothing? To watch people like you, born with silver spoons in your mouths, wasting opportunities that people like me would kill for?" She paused, a sardonic smile twisting her lips. "Well, I did kill for it, didn't I? Your precious Sarah, your Uncle Edward, they were in my way, so I removed them." Jonathan felt his knees go weak. To hear her admit it so casually, as if she were discussing the weather. "You're insane," he whispered. "No," Abigail countered. "I'm ambitious, and I refuse to let you ruin everything I've worked for." "What do you want?" Jonathan asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "Money? Take it. Take it all. Just let Lily go." Abigail pretended to consider for a moment, tapping the gun thoughtfully against her chin. "Tempting," she mused. "But no, you see, Jonathan, money isn't enough anymore. I want it all. The Prescott name, the legacy, everything. And for that, I need Lily." "I don't understand," Jonathan said, his confusion evident. "Of course you don't." Abigail sighed, as if explaining to a particularly slow child. "Think about it. If something were to happen to you, who would inherit everything? Your only child, of course, and as Lily's loving stepmother and legal guardian, who would control that inheritance until she comes of age? Me." The full horror of Abigail's plan dawned on Jonathan. "You're going to kill me," he said quietly. Abigail's smile was chilling. "Give the man a prize. Yes, Jonathan, you're going to have a tragic accident. Perhaps you'll fall down these rickety old stairs. Or maybe you'll crash your car on the way home, overcome with grief after finding your daughter and wife had perished in a horrible fire." She gestured around the room with the gun. "This old place is a tinderbox. It would go up so quickly. By the time anyone found us, there'd be nothing left but ashes." Lily whimpered, and Jonathan felt a surge of protective rage. "You won't get away with this," he growled. "People know I'm here. They'll come looking." "Oh, I'm counting on it," Abigail said with a smirk. "Your friend Mitch, I assume." "Don't worry, I've planned for that too. By the time he gets here, it'll be far too late." Jonathan's mind raced, searching desperately for a way out. He couldn't rush Abigail, not with the gun pointed at Lily. He couldn't reason with her. She was clearly beyond reason. What could he do? As if reading his thoughts, Abigail stood, pulling Lily up with her. "Enough chit-chat," she said. "It's time to end this. Move, Jonathan." Up the stairs. With the gun now trained on him, Jonathan had no choice but to obey. He climbed the creaking stairs slowly, hyper-aware of Abigail and Lily behind him. His daughter's quiet sobs tore at his heart. At the top of the stairs, Abigail directed him into what had once been the master bedroom. The room was large but bare, most of the furniture long since removed or rotted away. "Perfect," Abigail murmured. "A lovely place for a tragic fall, don't you think?" Jonathan's back was to the window now, Abigail and Lily framed in the doorway. He could see over Abigail's shoulder, down the stairs to the front door. If only there were some way to signal for help. Suddenly, a movement caught his eye. Through the dirty glass of the front door, he saw a shadow move. Someone was out there. Hope surged through him, but he kept his face carefully neutral. He couldn't let Abigail know help might be on the way. "You don't have to do this, Abigail," he said, trying to keep her attention on him. "Think about Lily. Do you really want her to see this?" Abigail's laugh was harsh. "Oh, Jonathan, still trying to appeal to my better nature. There's no saving me, and there's no saving you. But don't worry about Lily. Children are resilient. She'll forget all about this in time." She raised the gun, aiming it squarely at Jonathan's chest. "Any last words, darling?" Time seemed to slow down. Jonathan saw Abigail's finger tightening on the trigger. He saw Lily's terrified face, and he saw over Abigail's shoulder the front door slowly, silently opening. In that split second, Jonathan made his decision. He lunged forward, not at Abigail, but at Lily. He wrapped his arms around his daughter and twisted, using his body to shield her as they fell to the floor. The gun went off, the sound deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. Jonathan felt a searing pain in his shoulder, but he didn't let go of Lily. There was a commotion from the doorway. Jonathan heard shouting, the sound of a struggle. He raised his head just in time to see Mitch wrestling the gun away from Abigail. "It's okay," he whispered to Lily, who was trembling in his arms. "It's over. We're safe now." But as the words left his mouth, he saw Abigail break free from Mitch's grasp. With a feral scream, she charged towards them. Jonathan tried to move, to get Lily out of the way, but he was hampered by his injured shoulder. He closed his eyes, waiting for the impact. It never came. Instead, there was a loud crash and the sound of splintering wood. Jonathan opened his eyes to see a gaping hole in the rotted floorboards where Abigail had been standing just moments before. Her scream echoed up from below, cut off abruptly by a sickening thud. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, Lily burst into fresh tears, clinging to Jonathan. He held her close, murmuring soothing words even as his own shock threatened to overwhelm him. Mitch appeared in his field of vision, his face pale. "Jesus, John, are you okay? Is Lily?" Jonathan nodded numbly. We're all right. Abigail, is she?" Mitch's expression was grim. "I'll check. You stay here with Lily. Ambulance is on its way." As Mitch disappeared down the stairs, Jonathan focused on comforting Lily. "It's okay, baby," he whispered, stroking her hair. "It's all over now. We're going to be okay." But even as he said the words, he couldn't shake the feeling that this nightmare was far from over. Abigail's revelations about Sarah and Uncle Edward, the depths of her deception, the lengths she'd been willing to go to, it was all too much to process. And as the sound of sirens grew closer, Jonathan realized that their ordeal was only just beginning. There would be questions, investigations, maybe even a trial. How could he protect Lily from all of that? For now, though, he pushed those worries aside. His daughter was safe in his arms. They were alive. Everything else could wait. As the first responders burst into the room, Jonathan closed his eyes and said a silent prayer of thanks. They had survived. Somehow, against all odds, they had survived. But little did Jonathan know, the greatest challenges and the darkest secrets were yet to come. The following weeks passed in a blur for Jonathan. There were hospital visits, police interviews, and endless meetings with lawyers. The media circus that erupted around the Prescott family scandal was relentless, forcing Jonathan to hire security just to keep reporters away from Lily. Through it all, Jonathan's sole focus was on his daughter's well-being. Lily had withdrawn into herself, rarely speaking and plagued by nightmares. The trauma of her ordeal with Abigail had left deep scars, both physical and emotional. It was a crisp autumn morning when Jonathan found himself sitting across from Dr. Elena Martinez, the child psychologist he'd engaged to help Lily. The doctor's office was warm and inviting, filled with soft colors and comforting toys, but Jonathan felt anything but comfortable as he waited for her assessment. "Mr. Prescott," Dr. Martinez began, her voice gentle but firm. "I've been working with Lily for several weeks now, and I have to be honest with you. The road to recovery for her is going to be long and difficult." Jonathan nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "I understand. Whatever she needs, whatever it takes, I'll do it." Dr. Martinez gave him a sad smile. "I know you will. But Mr. Prescott, Jonathan, I'm concerned about you as well. Have you considered talking to someone yourself?" The question caught Jonathan off guard. "Me? I'm fine. I wasn't the one who—" "You were shot," Dr. Martinez interrupted. "You nearly lost your daughter. You discovered your wife was a murderer who had been manipulating you for years. That's a tremendous amount of trauma to process." Jonathan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He'd been so focused on Lily that he'd barely given himself time to think about everything that had happened. "I can't afford to fall apart," he said quietly. "Lily needs me to be strong." "Being strong doesn't mean ignoring your own pain," Dr. Martinez countered. "In fact, showing Lily that it's okay to ask for help, to talk about difficult feelings, could be incredibly beneficial for her recovery." Her words struck a chord in Jonathan. He thought about the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, the moments when the weight of everything threatened to crush him. Maybe she had a point. "I'll think about it," he conceded. As he left Dr. Martinez's office, Jonathan's phone buzzed with a message from Mitch. "We need to talk. Meet me at the usual place." The usual place had become a small, out-of-the-way diner where they could speak privately without fear of being overheard. When Jonathan arrived, Mitch was already there, a grim expression on his face. "What's wrong?" Jonathan asked as he slid into the booth. Mitch sighed heavily. "I've been doing some more digging, John, about Abigail's past, about your Uncle Edward's death, and I've found something troubling." Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine. "What is it?" "I think Abigail might have had help," Mitch said, his voice low. "There are inconsistencies in the financial records, large sums of money moving around in ways that don't make sense. I think someone in your family's company might have been working with her." The implications of Mitch's words hit Jonathan like a physical blow. "Are you saying this goes beyond Abigail, that someone else in my life might be involved?" Mitch nodded gravely. "I can't be certain yet, but the evidence is pointing that way. John, I hate to say this, but I think you need to be careful. We don't know how deep this goes or who might be involved." Jonathan's mind reeled. Just when he thought they were past the worst of it, that they could start to heal and move on, this new threat emerged. How much more could he and Lily endure? As if sensing his despair, Mitch reached across the table and gripped Jonathan's arm. "We'll figure this out, John. We've come this far. We won't let them win." Jonathan nodded, trying to draw strength from his friend's words. But as he left the diner and headed home, a sense of dread settled over him. The nightmare wasn't over. It was only beginning. At home, Jonathan found Lily curled up on the couch, clutching the stuffed bear he'd bought her after they left the hospital. She looked up as he entered, her eyes wide and fearful. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly, sitting down beside her. "How was your day?" Lily shrugged, not meeting his eyes. "Okay, I guess." Jonathan's heart ached at her subdued response. He remembered the vibrant, laughing child she had been before all this. Would he ever see that Lily again? "Lily," he began, choosing his words carefully, "you know you can talk to me about anything, right? Anything at all." For a moment, Lily was quiet. Then, in a voice so small Jonathan had to strain to hear it, she asked, "Is the bad lady really gone?" Jonathan pulled her close, wrapping her in a protective embrace. "Yes, baby, she's gone and she can never hurt you again, I promise." As he held his daughter, Jonathan silently renewed his vow to protect her, no matter the cost. He wouldn't let anyone or anything harm her ever again. That night, after Lily had finally fallen asleep, Jonathan sat in his study, poring over the financial records Mitch had sent him. The numbers swam before his eyes, a confusing maze of transactions and accounts. He was about to give up for the night when something caught his eye, a series of transfers, all to the same offshore account, all authorized by... Jonathan felt his blood run cold. The signature on the transfers was one he knew well. It belonged to his own father, Richard Prescott. No, Jonathan thought, his mind reeling. It can't be. There has to be some other explanation. But the more he looked, the more damning the evidence became. His father, the man he had idolized all his life, appeared to be deeply involved in whatever scheme Abigail had been running. Jonathan sat back in his chair, feeling as if the floor had dropped out from under him. If he couldn't trust his own father, who could he trust? A soft knock at the door startled him out of his thoughts. He quickly closed the laptop as Emily Jonathan's world spun as he stared at the closed laptop, his sister Emily's knock still echoing in his ears. How could he face her, knowing what he'd just discovered about their father? "Come in," he called, his voice strained. Emily entered, her face etched with concern. "John, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." If only she knew how accurate that description was. Jonathan felt like he was looking at the ghost of everything he thought he knew about his family. "I'm fine," he lied, forcing a smile. "Just tired." "What's up?" Emily hesitated, then said, "It's Dad. He's been calling non-stop, asking why you haven't returned his messages. He says he's worried about you and Lily." Jonathan felt a surge of bitter laughter threatening to escape. "Worried? Or checking to see if I'm onto him?" "Tell him we're fine," Jonathan said, more sharply than he intended. Seeing Emily's hurt expression, he softened his tone. "I'm sorry, Em. It's just been a lot. I'll call him tomorrow, okay?" After Emily left, Jonathan sat in the darkness of his study, his mind racing. What was he going to do? Confront his father? Go to the police? He needed more information, more proof. The next morning, Jonathan dropped Lily off at school, his heart heavy. He hated leaving her, even for a few hours, but he had to get to the bottom of this. He drove to Prescott Enterprises, the company his grandfather had built from nothing, the legacy his father had stewarded for decades. As he walked through the familiar halls, employees greeted him warmly, unaware of the turmoil raging inside him. Jonathan's father, Richard Prescott, was in his office, poring over documents. He looked up as Jonathan entered, a smile spreading across his face. "Jonathan, it's good to see you, son. I've been so worried." "Save it, Dad," Jonathan interrupted, his voice cold. "I know." Richard's smile faltered. "Know what?" Jonathan pulled out the financial records he'd printed, spreading them across his father's desk. "I know about the offshore accounts, the transfers, your connection to Abigail." The color drained from Richard's face. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Richard seemed to deflate, sinking back into his chair. "How did you find out?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Does it matter?" Jonathan snapped. "What matters is that you were involved in this nightmare. Do you have any idea what Abigail did? What she put Lily through? Richard's eyes widened in genuine shock. Lily? What are you talking about, Jonathan? Jonathan stared at his father, confusion mixing with his anger. Abigail, she abused Lily, terrorized her. She tried to kill us both. Oh my God, Richard breathed, horror etching itself across his features. Jonathan, I swear to you I had no idea. I never thought, I never imagined she would hurt Lily. Then what did you think was happening? Jonathan demanded. Why were you transferring money to her? Richard's shoulders slumped. It started years ago with your Uncle Edward. He had a gambling problem, a bad one. He was embezzling from the company to cover his debts. Jonathan felt like he'd been punched in the gut. What? I found out, Richard continued, his voice heavy with shame. I confronted him, but instead of turning him in, I helped him cover it up. I couldn't bear the thought of the scandal, of what it would do to the family name. So you just let him get away with it? Jonathan asked incredulously. Richard shook his head. No, I made him step down from the company, quietly. But the damage was done. We were in debt, deeply in debt to some very dangerous people. Realization dawned on Jonathan. And that's where Abigail came in. Richard nodded. She approached me, said she could help. She had connections, she said. Could make our problems go away. All she wanted in return was a place in the family. So you set her up with me, Jonathan said, feeling sick. I introduced you, Richard corrected. The rest, I thought it was genuine, Jonathan. I swear I did. When you fell in love, when you married her, I was relieved. I thought it was all working out. Jonathan's mind was reeling. But the transfers, they continued after we were married. Richard's face crumpled. She blackmailed me, threatened to expose everything if I didn't keep paying. I was trapped, Jonathan. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. As Jonathan listened to his father's confession, a mixture of emotions churned within him. Anger, betrayal, disbelief, but also, surprisingly, a flicker of understanding. His father had been trying to protect the family, misguided as his actions were. Dad, Jonathan said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion, do you realize what your actions have cost us? Sarah, was Abigail responsible for her death too? Richard's face went pale. I don't know. I never asked. I was afraid to know. Jonathan felt a wave of nausea. The possibility that his father's misdeeds had led, however indirectly, to Sarah's death was almost too much to bear. We have to go to the police, Jonathan said finally. All of this, it needs to come out. Richard nodded, looking older and more defeated than Jonathan had ever seen him. You're right. It's time to face the consequences of my actions. As they prepared to leave the office, Jonathan's phone rang. It was Mitch. John. Mitch's voice was urgent. We've got a problem. Tom Grady, the witness, he's missing. Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine. Missing? What do you mean? He was supposed to meet with the DA this morning to give his official statement. He never showed. His apartment's been ransacked. Jonathan's mind raced. Tom Grady was the key to proving Abigail's involvement in Sarah's death. Without him, this isn't over, Jonathan realized aloud. Abigail might be gone, but whoever was working with her is still out there. As he hung up, Jonathan turned to his father, his expression grim. Dad, I need you to tell me everything. Every detail, every person Abigail ever mentioned. Someone is still trying to cover this up, and we need to find out who. Richard nodded, determination replacing the defeat in his eyes. Of course, whatever you need. As they left Prescott Enterprises together, Jonathan felt a mix of dread and resolve. The truth was finally coming to light. But at what cost? And what dangers still lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike? One thing was certain. This was far from over. The final battle was yet to come, and Jonathan knew that everything, his family, his future, and most importantly Lily's safety, hung in the balance. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Jonathan, his father, and Mitch worked tirelessly, piecing together the complex web of deceit that Abigail had woven. They combed through years of financial records, followed paper trails, and connected dots that had long been obscured. What emerged was a picture more disturbing than Jonathan could have imagined. Abigail's network ran deep, involving not just his family's company, but reaching into law enforcement, local government, and even the justice system. As the scope of the conspiracy became clear, Jonathan felt a growing sense of dread. How could they possibly bring down something this big, this entrenched? It was Mitch who provided the breakthrough they desperately needed. "I think I've found Tom Grady," he announced, bursting into Jonathan's study late one night. Jonathan, who had been dozing at his desk, jerked awake. "What? Where?" Mitch spread out a series of documents and photographs. "I've been tracking unusual police activity. There's been an increased presence around an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. It's owned by a shell company that I've traced back to one of Abigail's aliases." Hope flared in Jonathan's chest. "You think they're holding him there?" Mitch nodded grimly. "It fits, but John, if we're right, we need to move fast. There's no telling how long they'll keep him alive." Jonathan's mind raced. They couldn't go to the police, not when they didn't know who they could trust. But they couldn't just leave Tom there either. "We need to get him out ourselves," Jonathan said, the words feeling surreal even as he spoke them. Mitch looked at him in shock. "John, that's insane. We're not trained for this kind of thing. It's too dangerous." "We don't have a choice," Jonathan insisted. "Tom is the key to all of this. Without his testimony, we have nothing concrete to take to the authorities. We have to try." After hours of arguing and planning, they finally had a rough strategy. It was risky, borderline suicidal, but it was the only chance they had. As dawn broke, Jonathan found himself crouched behind a rusted dumpster, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure it would give him away. Beside him, Mitch checked his watch for the 100th time. "Remember the plan," Mitch whispered. "I'll create a distraction at the front. You slip in the back, find Tom, and get out. No heroics." Jonathan nodded, too nervous to speak. This was madness, but it was too late to back out now. Mitch squeezed his shoulder once, then slipped away into the early morning mist. Moments later, Jonathan heard a series of loud bangs and shouts from the front of the warehouse. That was his cue. Moving as quietly as he could, Jonathan made his way to the back entrance. The lock was old and rusted, and with a silent prayer of thanks, he managed to force it open. The interior of the warehouse was dim and musty. Jonathan crept forward, every sense on high alert. He could hear commotion from the front of the building. Mitch's distraction was working. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Jonathan heard a muffled groan. Following the sound, he found himself in a small, dank room. And there, tied to a chair and looking worse for wear, was Tom Grady. "Mr. Grady," Jonathan whispered, rushing to untie him. "We're here to get you out." Tom's eyes widened in recognition and relief. "Thank God," he mumbled through split and swollen lips. Jonathan had just finished freeing Tom when he heard footsteps approaching. Panic surged through him. They were out of time. "Can you walk?" he asked Tom urgently. Tom nodded weakly, and Jonathan slung the older man's arm over his shoulder. Together, they stumbled towards the exit. They had almost made it when a shout rang out behind them. "Stop right there!" Jonathan's blood ran cold as he recognized the voice. He turned slowly, coming face to face with Detective Harris, the lead investigator on Abigail's case. "Detective," Jonathan said, his mind racing, "thank goodness you're here. We found Mr. Grady." "Save it, Prescott," Harris snarled, his gun trained steadily on Jonathan's chest. "Did you really think you could interfere with our operation and get away with it?" In that moment, everything clicked into place. Harris wasn't here to help. He was part of Abigail's network. "You're working for them," Jonathan said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Harris's smile was cold. "Smart boy. Now step away from Grady. He's coming with me." "No," Jonathan said, surprised by the steel in his own voice. "I'm not letting you take him." Harris's finger tightened on the trigger. "Have it your way." Time seemed to slow down. Jonathan saw Harris's finger start to squeeze, saw the barrel of the gun aimed at his heart. He closed his eyes, bracing for the impact. But the shot never came. Instead, there was a loud thud, followed by a clatter as the gun hit the floor. Jonathan's eyes flew open to see Harris crumpled on the ground, and behind him, wielding a heavy wrench, stood his father. "Dad?" Jonathan gasped, unable to believe his eyes. Richard Prescott stood there, breathing heavily, the wrench still raised. "I couldn't let you do this alone," he said. "I've made so many mistakes, Jonathan. It was time I did something right." Before Jonathan could respond, more shouts echoed through the warehouse. "We need to go," Richard urged. "Now!" What followed was a blur of adrenaline and fear. Somehow they managed to get Tom to Mitch's waiting car. As they sped away, Jonathan looked back to see police cars converging on the warehouse. Hours later, safely ensconced in a hotel room, Jonathan watched as Tom Grady gave his statement to a trusted FBI agent Mitch had contacted. With Tom's testimony and the evidence they had gathered, the entire conspiracy began to unravel. Over the next few weeks, arrests were made, charges were filed, and the true extent of Abigail's network was exposed. The scandal rocked Charleston to its core. Through it all, Jonathan focused on Lily. With Abigail's network dismantled and the truth finally out, his daughter slowly began to emerge from her shell. There were still nightmares, still moments of fear, but there was also laughter again, and hope. As for Jonathan and his father, the road to reconciliation was long and difficult. But as they worked together to rebuild their family's company and reputation, a new understanding began to form between them. One sunny afternoon, months after that harrowing night at the warehouse, Jonathan sat on a park bench, watching Lily play. She was smiling, truly smiling, for the first time in what felt like forever. "She looks happy," a voice said beside him. Jonathan turned to see Dr. Martinez, Lily's psychologist, sitting down next to him. "She is," Jonathan agreed, his heart swelling with love and pride. "We both are," Dr. Martinez smiled. "You've both come so far, Jonathan. How are you feeling?" Jonathan considered the question. The past year had been the hardest of his life. He had faced betrayal, violence, and heartbreak. He had nearly lost everything, but he had also discovered a strength he never knew he possessed. He had rebuilt his relationship with his father, forged new friendships, and most importantly, he had protected Lily. "I feel grateful," he said finally, "and ready for whatever comes next." As he watched Lily laugh and play, Jonathan felt a sense of peace wash over him. The nightmare was over. They had survived, and whatever challenges the future held, they would face them together. In that moment, under the warm Charleston sun, Jonathan Prescott finally allowed himself to believe that everything would be okay.